Hi there, me again. I'm Reid. We got Gemma here on the camera work and editing, and we have another Bloodied But Unbowed webisode for you with some never before seen Henry Rollins interview footage. We have about 47 minutes of him talking, but we must admit it's from 6 years ago, and some of the stuff that he talks about has become a bit dated, to say the least, in the last little while. It was the interview was conducted before the 2008 American election, and a lot of stuff has happened since then. So we are going to show you a little bit more of the historical stuff that he talks about, specifically the Vancouver punk scene's sort of activism that it represented to him, as opposed to the punk scenes of other places, LA mostly, and its connection to Jello Biafra, which is relevant to me as well, because personally, my first introduction to political punk music was Green Day, their American Idiot album in 2004. That was some of the first political music I ever listened to, and of course, in retrospect, it's quite superficial and stuff. Like, it's very safe in the mainstream, both back then and now, to say George W. Bush is an idiot, blah, 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 vote Democrat, and not really say anything else beyond that kind of thing. The Iraq War is bad, and so on. But from there, I moved on to Jello Biafra and the Dead Kennedys, and that was a huge political awakening for me, and also a musical awakening. It was one of the first times where any sort of political issues were explained to me in any detail, and then I responded with oh, right, yeah, I should worry about that. I should care about that. This is why this is important. I never knew that. That was my first introduction. And then from there, you become aware of DOA and the Vancouver scene, how it's relevant to more Canadian interests, which, as Canadians, as kids, we grow up knowing more about American politics and American history than our own. Like, I knew who George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were before I knew who John A. Macdonald was, and any of the other prime ministers that are important that I can't remember. And in terms of the punk scene today and the sort of political aspect of that, I am a big fan of there being a connection to politics in the music scene, if not necessarily in the music. Like, I don't always care about the songs and music having a political position, but I do think that the people in it should at least be aware of that and sort of use their position to talk about those kinds of things. The one band that really carries the same torch that DOA did nowadays in Vancouver is the Rebel Spell. All of their stuff is very, talks about the issues from a radical point of view, much like DOA did. They've opened for DOA on several occasions. Just in general, you see a much more feminist music scene than there was previously, a much more, not just gay-friendly, but also trans-friendly, and those, at any point on those kinds of spectrums, friendly, much more than previously, much more radically environmentalist, and much more aware of Indigenous issues as well, which I just think is a natural sort of progression from the beginnings of it, not to put the old scene down, of course. But yeah, so that's what you're going to see today on the Punk Movie YouTube channel, and hope you enjoy it.
What I noticed about the Canadian punk scene, and I was a very young guy when I first encountered it. I first knew Canadian punk rock as an export item when it would be sleeping on my floor in Washington, D.C. DOA, Subhumans, they would come through D.C. and we would put them up. That's kind of what we did. We put up other bands, and years later I would sleep on these same floors as a visitor myself to my own hometown. And so that's how I got to know these people, and we'd go see them play, and great. It was all great stuff. But what took me was how politically aware the bands were compared to what we were coming across with in my hometown. Lyrically, we were more into, that girl was bad, or, just like kid stuff, which is all very important when you're 18 or whatever. But your Joe Shitheads and the like were coming on with something way more politically way more in line with like Jello Biafra and the Dead Kennedys. That's the thing I drew. I was like, oh, well, those two should get a room. They're definitely kind of on the same wavelength. And I got a lot of information from Jello as a mouthpiece and DOA as a band, as far as that kind of awakening. And you get body slammed right into 8 years of Reagan. And that was a guy who was kind of universally hated by every musician and audience member, no matter where you went. I mean, as an American, I would get grief about Ronald Reagan. Like in England, how's your friend Ronald Reagan? I'm like, pal, look at me. How he and I ever going to get along? And so you took it in the teeth for this guy. And I noticed that the Canadian punk scene was always very activist and politically rooted, like it was a means to make people aware and awake, where the Southern California punk scene was, I hate the cops, I like drugs, I like chicks, which is all fine, that's all great, but in a way, you know what I mean. But where the San Francisco scene was way more an intellectual and kind of wink wink, come on. And the Canadian punk rock scene seemed to be way more of that. Of course, you had your bands that just sang about like destruction and, drinking and knocking your head into a wall. That's fine too. But to me, it was DOA that was really spearheading that whole thing, giving the Canadian punk scene they're probably the most well-known export item because they actually played outside of Canada a lot. Like, I thought Black Flag played a lot. And then, you'd always see that DOA van out there. You're like, damn, man, they don't quit, which is great. The world needs that. I think what America suffered from, and when I was young and still now, relative ease. The Midwest, you never have to, if you live in the Midwest, I'm not putting the Midwest down. It's a nice bit of territory. But if you, with a non-compulsory military service, you never have to deal with Iraq, deal with Katrina, global climate change. In your lifetime, you can just keep eating at Wendy's, keep watching American Idol, and buying DVD box sets. You can cocoon yourself away with 1,500 miles on either side of you, and every one of your neighbors with a pickup truck and a gun. And you never have to give a damn. You never have to vote. It's not compulsory voting. You never have to be part of it. And when you're a child in the middle of that, I come from one of the coasts. I come from the East Coast where people are busy. They talk a lot. The East Coast people talk very quickly. My mom was in Humphrey's election campaign. She worked in the government her whole life. Basically, she battled Reagan very hard. She worked for health, education, and welfare, or national education and planning. Health, education, and welfare, national education and planning, welfare, education, planning. Reagan hated all of that. In the last few years, Canada is it's swinging gently or maybe not so gently to the right, I've noticed. And I don't know about your new guy, but apparently he's quite a bit of work.
Yes.
Yeah, not down with the homosexuals. I'm seeing that
what
there's a
is
lot
it?
more politically aware people, but there's a lot of external factors affecting that. The internet, for one, which is huge. I mean, imagine your life now without the internet. You want some information. You're really going to go to a library and pull a book down? Please. I don't even think like that anymore outside the environs of my own office where I have a lot of books and I pull them down quite often. But as far as if I want to know about Genghis Khan right now, I go to the Googles. I go on the internets. And so there's a lot of information to be had. So I think a lot of young people having a computer no further than arm's length away from them a lot of the time, when your body looks good enough for porn, you don't need to download it because you're having it. So you can spend more time online looking up interesting information. And so hopefully that's what they're doing, and maybe that's the rationale, as if I understand what's on the mind of a young person. It's been a long time. And so maybe young people, at least where I come from, are starting to see that they are adopting this country. The wheel is now going to be in their hands. And what's being done in their name with their dwindling resources is a nightmare they're going to have to deal with, and not catastrophically near what their kids are going to have to deal with. like what their kids are going to deal with, is going to be sci-fi. As it is right now, our foreign policy, to me, is just a disaster. It's the classic example if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. Because all we do is we find military solutions to every possible problem, and a lot of these are problems that we create. So I go, oh, they don't like democracy, eh? We'll give them democracy. We'll put an army base there. That'll show them. And if they say, hey, get out of my country, we'll call them insurgents. And so, and that's your, having a military solution. And why would you do that? Well, you make a lot of money selling bullets. So why wouldn't, if you are beholden to KBR, Halliburton, Bechtel, DynCorp, Triple Canopy, Instinctive Shooting, and Blackwater, if they're your boys, well then why wouldn't everything have a military solution? Because you can sell them all eats, tents, and lots of bullets and new kick-ass guns. And so peace is only the thing that gets in the way of all the fun. So we need someone who wants to get in the way of all the fun.